Hello and welcome to another Fantasy Premier League video. My name is Steve and today we're taking a look at an aggressive wildcard that I built at the closure of Game Week 16 while all the Premier League fixture results and teams performance and whatnot was all fresh in mind. I thought it was a good idea to probably put that wildcard together then because with all the World Cup football going on, I have basically switched off, like many of you probably have out there, from the Premier League and have forgotten exactly what was going on. So I will have to refer to a few notes that I made throughout this to remind ourselves what the state of play was with the various teams. Now, obviously, the World Cup has chucked some injuries our way in terms of Premier League players. For example, Jesus, who was, I think, owned by 56 to 60% worth of players out there, has picked up a knee injury in their group stage match, which he has had an operation on last week, but sees him out for probably 2 to 3 months. And so that is a big blow for Jesus and the Arsenal team. It does put forward some pretty cool differentials in the assets of Nketiah, who's looking likely to probably go up front in Arsenal. But I digress. Let's just go straight into the the wildcard squad. So in net, I've got Kepa from Chelsea, who is actually a very high differential. He's only owned by 2.1% of all players in the game at the moment, and he is very kindly priced down at 4.5 million. Now, he wasn't playing for Chelsea at the end of the first half of the season through an injury, which he is still flagged for in the Premier League game. He's got a foot injury, and it's said with a 75% chance of playing. Mendy was in net and could potentially keep his place, but my thoughts are, and I think a lot of other managers are thinking the same way here, is that Potter will probably put Kepa back in net as soon as he is fit and ready, and that is simply because he is much better with his feet and able to pass a ball. Mendy does struggle with even some simple passes out there, but even more so when he's put under pressure. And so as soon as Kepa is fit, I think he will be straight back into the squad. However, we will need to obviously closely monitor this injury to see whether or not he will be fit and ready for game week 17 or not. Should also be noted that there are some double game weeks that have been announced in game weeks 19, 20 and 23, where Chelsea do pick up a double in game week 19. It's not an amazing double, as they do have to play Man City at home, but their other fixture is against Fulham away. Now, to back up Kepa in net, we've gone with Danny Ward at 4.1 million. I think Danny Ward will pretty much be in everyone's squad after the unlimited transfers used by all the managers out there. He's super cheap, playing for a Leicester side that started the season struggling in defence, and when Danny Ward did come in, he was not prolific in net, but through the later stages of the first half of the season, he did keep a string of clean sheets together, and anyone that went with the Ward and Everson combo were actually paid quite handsomely in terms of FPL points. Now, moving on to the defense. Cancelo, for me, is an absolute lock in my team. I have had him since game week 1. He is owned by 54.3% of all managers and is now up to 7.4 million. So if I was to sell Cancelo, I would make a 0.2 million loss on that if I ever wanted to get him back. But considering that Man City have a tentative 2 sets of doubles, they have currently been scheduled in for a double in game week 20, where they're away to Manchester United and then have a game at home to Tottenham. And then there is another double a couple of weeks later in game week 23, which is the kind of double where they have Aston Villa at home, but then they also have to play Arsenal away. Now, those that double game week, I think in game week 20 is still tentative because of the FA Cup, I believe. Now, that means if there is a replay that needs to be played for whatever reason, that game would drop out of the Premier League schedule, and so with it would Manchester City's double. But considering that they, well, not considering, but assuming that they do make it through without having to play that replay, they will have two doubles, and so we will be looking towards getting 3 City assets into our squads to maximise our chances at returns there. Cancelo's been not as prolific as he was last season. Man City is still the best defence in the league, even though they have dropped off quite a lot from the previous year, and Cancelo is also not getting as far forward as he was. However, for the Man City team and the fixture congestion that is lining up for game weeks, well, right through until early stages of January, we're really looking for nailed on players from the City squad, and Cancelo is about as nailed as you can get in the City team. And so for me, in this very aggressive strategy, I don't want to add too much risk to the team by going for the likes of, you'll see here that I don't have Foden in my team. Foden is a great shout for Fantasy Premier League, but having owned him through his consecutive benchings with no apparent reason given by Pep, I am quite nervous about how his minutes will play out, especially in this fixture congestion. And so I am looking to just lock in nailed on players from pretty much all the teams. I'm not looking for any players here that are too prone to rotation, because as you'll see, if you are going uber ultra aggressive, you do have to make concessions on your bench and even with some of the starting players in the squad, and you are basically hoping that your premium players can keep up with the likes of the 8 million midfielders that you'll see a lot more heavily involved in wildcards that do not have 3 or more premiums in their squads. So moving on to the other 2 starting defenders, I am doubling up on the Newcastle defence. I was actually tripled up on the Newcastle defence, as I did have Pope in net game week 16, and to be fair, it was actually a great play. Newcastle in their last 5 games kept 3 clean sheets, and the other 2 games they actually only conceded 1 goal in each of those matches, and both of those goals came after the 80-minute mark, so they were super close to keeping 5 clean sheets in a row. Super annoying to see goals going in like the 88th minute when it wipes out a triple clean, but Newcastle are looking like a sound squad. They are definitely worthy of sitting where they are on the table. They look, in my honest opinion, I think they look like a top 3 side at the moment, both in attack and defense, and so doubling up on Newcastle and defense is I'm actually very comfortable with. Now you'll see, obviously I've got Trippier in here. I think every squad out there will still be holding on to Trippier or getting Trippier in if they do not already own him. He is probably the second highest owned player in the game at 64.6%, so a lot of you out there already have him. I doubt many of you will be selling him, as his returns for his price point are just unreal. And so Botman is actually one of the, say, downgrades, I suppose, that I've had to make in order to fit in the 3.5 premium players into this squad. Botman's only 4.4 million, and he is quite differential. He's only owned by 2.8% of the game, And for the good reason. The only reason you get Botman in is really only for the clean sheets, as if you were going to go for any sort of attacking output, and we're not talking about Trippier here, Fabian Schär has had 16 goal attempts, Dan Burn has had 9 goal attempts, and Botman is sitting way down on 6 goal attempts after 16 game weeks, and so you are not. I am not expecting any sort of attacking returns from Botman. He's just in there as hopefully a nailed-on best chance at clean sheet for a very cheap price at 4.4 million. Excuse me. Now, if we move on to midfield, Almiron was killing my rank in the last few game weeks, week on week. As I mentioned, I was on the triple Newcastle defence, and so I had no easy way of getting Almiron into my team. That has now been fixed with the unlimited transfers, or is looking very likely to be fixed in both the wildcard drafts that I have built, one that I'll go through in my next video, which is a lot more standard or a lot safer with a stronger bench. Almiron is still in that squad. He's only 5.8 million and he is probably the best budget attacker in Fantasy Premier League. Well, at the moment, but let's just say at the end of game week 16. Who knows how it's going to change after the World Cup. Obviously, it's been a pretty big break for some teams and some players who haven't even been to the World Cup. But looking at how Newcastle were performing for the final game weeks leading up to the season, and the way that Almiron himself was performing, he is always in and around the box. He is shooting accurately and often and scoring. And for 5.8 million, you can't really go wrong. I don't know how you don't put him into your squads. He's just, yeah, he's probably a lock in most teams out there. Now, if we move across to my first premium, I've gone with Kevin De Bruyne. I actually started the season with Kevin De Bruyne over Haaland, as I wanted to see Haaland bed himself into the English Premier League. That was obviously a mistake to go instead of Haaland, but in addition to Haaland, Kevin De Bruyne looks like an outstanding pick. We have probably the best midfielder in the world at the moment in Kevin De Bruyne, with an elite level of assist rate and quality of delivery into the best striker that the Premier League has probably ever seen. And so Kevin De Bruyne is also, I should note, probably the other most nailed on player in the City squad. He is not he's not prone to rotation, but he is not. He has been rotated earlier in the season. It's getting flashbacks here to the one game week where I had all my chips in on Kevin De Bruyne, and it was the last week I didn't own Haaland, as I was going to get Haaland the following week. De Bruyne, I think, got benched, and then Haaland went and scored a hat-trick, and that is still obviously burning somewhere in the back of my memory. But it's either Kevin De Bruyne or Salah in the 3 premium setup, and with City still managing to produce an amazing amount of goals, someone has to be there to assist Haaland. Kevin De Bruyne hasn't been getting as far forward as potentially he was in the previous season or even earlier stages of the season. We saw Kevin De Bruyne doing a lot of pressing high up the pitch and actually managing to win the ball high up the pitch and generate his own attacks while he was doing the running for Haaland. But as the season or the game weeks went on, we found that Kevin De Bruyne basically ended up leaving that to the more forward players and coming and sitting a bit further back into the midfield. He was pulling the strings in midfield and setting up quite a lot of numbers in terms of your expected assists for all of you stat monsters out there. But if we compare Kevin De Bruyne to Salah in straight up terms, Salah is probably having one of his quieter seasons. I think they're basically very similar on point output at the moment. If we just have a quick look. Here we've got De Bruyne on 90 points and Salah on 82, so there's not a hell of a lot in it, but it really boils down to whether or not you think Liverpool are going to turn their season around and start performing the way they were last season, or if you think that we're going to see more of the same. Now, in Liverpool, there will be some changes that will affect the way that they play, with Luis Diaz looking like he's going to be ready to come back, as well as Jota. And so we've got Darwin Núñez, Firmino, Salah, Jota, and Diaz all vying for those front spots. I'm not entirely sure how that's going to affect Salah's output. Earlier parts of the season, when all those players were fit, it definitely did detriment Salah's chances in front of goal. And Salah is just not doing Salah things. He is well out of the bonus as well. His baseline bonus levels are just almost non-existent. He needs to score about a brace in a game to be in the bonus at all, and that is only if Liverpool are losing their clean sheets. And so if Liverpool do manage to tighten up and stop conceding goals in the first 15-20 minutes of matches and actually see out some clean sheets, then Salah's bonus chances are pretty much non-existent. And so in a straight up shootout between Kevin De Bruyne and Salah, I am leaning more on the De Bruyne side. And both of my drafts that you'll see before gameweek 17 kicks off, it is Salah-less, and I am actually very comfortable going without Salah moving forward into gameweek 17. Now, next up we have Martinelli, who is still a very highly owned asset in the game. He's at 48.8% of he's in 48.8% of all teams out there. He's currently priced at 6.8 million, though I suspect a lot of you got him a lot cheaper. And so you've probably got even more funds to play around with. I actually did a hokey cokey with Martinelli when Arsenal's fixtures got a little bit more difficult in the first half of the season, and immediately lost some value on Martinelli, and he continued to perform through those difficult fixtures, and so I had to get him back, having lost a little bit of money on him. Now, Jesus is out with a knee injury, which he picked up in the group stages of the World Cup. He has had surgery on that last week, where he is likely to be out for about 2 to 3 months, and so we will probably see Nketiah playing up front for Arsenal, although there is a very slim chance that we do see Martinelli maybe even go up front, depending on how Arteta lines up with Jesus out of the squad. Now, Jesus is actually a huge loss to Arsenal. His work rate in attack and defense is phenomenal. He does a lot of tracking back and a lot of work when Arsenal are compressing and when they're under pressure, and he does get them out of a lot of sticky situations. He's also great at holding up the ball and helping the team get out of defense. And so I don't know if Nketiah is the man for that job. And with Emile Smith-Rowe looking like he may be fit and ready to come back into the team, we could see some sort of major formation switch at Arsenal with Jesus out. And so Martinelli just looks like a solid, cheap hold with great potential for assists and goals. He's on some set pieces and is probably the other most nailed on player in my squad that is not looking likely to go anywhere. I mean, if he ends up front in that attacking Arsenal outfit, he is gold at 6.8 million, and so going absolutely nowhere from my team. And then McAllister from Brighton. Now he is in here as probably the key that unlocks the 3.5’mium. He is on pens for Brighton, but apart from that, there's not a hell of a lot going for McAllister. He may pick up the odd assist in games, although the way that Brighton play, it doesn't look too likely. He is just in there as a 5.4 million budget option that could pick up some goals through the odd penalty here and there. Like I said, when you put in 3 premium assets, you really do need to scrimp and save elsewhere, and that does impact the starting 11 with a choice like McAllister. You'll also see, once we go through the bench, that my bench is quite weak at the outset. However, there is a little bit of rotation going on there, where we could see some Patterson or Nico Williams being pulled in front of McAllister, or even Andreas Pereira is a great rotation option with McAllister. But McAllister would be the most likely starting player in this setup. Now, Haaland up front, it's obvious, no-brainer. He's owned by 82.8% of the whole game. I'm actually surprised that it's not higher. I would like to. I'm guessing this is probably going to go up to somewhere like 90 to 95% after the game resets and all the transfers have been made. He's going nowhere from pretty much anyone's squads, and so we don't really need to cover him too much. We then have Kane. So Kane is currently the second top scorer in FPL. He has been quietly ticking away with goals week on week. He hasn't gone absolutely mental yet. He just seems to pick up a goal every other week and just ticking along nicely. When he does get those goals, he does seem to be in the bonus as well, so it's not just a 6-point total score goal. We're looking at like 7 to 9 points here, and he definitely has the potential to go mental. He's on some free kicks, he's on pens obviously, and he's just a great asset to own. I do want to tap into the Tottenham attack because Tottenham do have the tentative double game week in game week 20. It is not an ideal double game week, as they do have to play the top two teams in the Premier League, with Arsenal at home and Man City away, but it is still an extra game for that game week. And to be honest, for game week 17, 18 and 19, those fixtures are pretty tasty, with Brentford away, Aston Villa at home, and then Crystal Palace away. Kane could go bonkers in those 3 matches. I've brought him in to probably hold on to him until, well, depends on whether or not that double does play in game week 20. If it does, then I will hold him for game week 20 and look to potentially move him on game week 21 or 22. The exit strategy from the 3.5’mium is to either get rid of Kane or Darwin after 3 weeks to bring in Mitrovic from Fulham for game week 19. So sorry, that's not 3 weeks, it's for the first 2 weeks. I do want Kane for the first 3 weeks, and Darwin also has a great run-in for the first 3 game weeks too. Liverpool play Aston Villa away, Leicester at home, and then Brentford away. And so one of these two will likely be making way for Mitrovic for their double in game week 19, which is away to Leicester and at home to Chelsea, which would give me both the 2 most likely attacking output guys from the Fulham squad, and Andreas Pereira and Mitrovic. But that's just a tentative plan. That will give me obviously a whole bunch of funds if I downgrade Kane and or Darwin to Mitrovic, which will allow me to spruce up the team elsewhere after I have seen a couple of game weeks of how the Premier League teams are actually performing now that they're all back in their units and playing with their standard teams. I don't know how the season's going to kick off again. We could see some major upsets like we did at the World Cup with the injuries and player rotations that are implemented by the various managers out there. But Haaland, Kane and Darwin Núñez up front looks like an extremely solid front line with Kevin De Bruyne in the midfield backing this up. Now, before I go onto the bench, we will touch on Darwin first. He was my trade in for game week 16, which was very luckily timed. He scored 2 goals and came away with 13 points, which boosted my score immensely in game week 16. And having watched him for the couple of game weeks leading up until game week 16, where I did pull him in, he is just a shoot on sight machine. He's extremely greedy, much so to the detriment of Salah and whoever ends up playing on the opposite wing to Salah, or sometimes Darwin even plays up front with Firmino in sort of a 4-2-4 type setup. He did have a bit of a rocky start to the league, but in the last few games he was looking outstanding. And then we move on to the bench. We've got Andreas Pereira, Neco Williams and Patterson, who looks to be back from Everton. Andreas has been, I think, on many people's benches throughout the first half of the season. He's got great assist potential with Mitrovic. He's also on a lot of set pieces, and currently at 4.6 million, he looks like probably one of the best fifth midfielders in the game at the moment. Now, Neco Williams is also uber cheap. He is currently, where is he at? Is it 4.1? He's still down at 4.0 million. He has been rotated in the heavy fixture congestion that was being played out in the later stages of the first half of the season before the break. And so when the fixture schedule gets quite congested through late December and early January, it could be a bit of a headache having Neco Williams. We don't want to play him a hell of a lot because Nottingham Forest are not the best defensive outfit out there, but for a 4 million playing wingback with a limited assist potential, he's pretty sound to just sit on the bench. Now, the reason I've stuck with Neco Williams is when Newcastle have tricky fixtures, coverage from Nottingham Forest and Everton does look pretty good in terms of the fixture lineup. So Newcastle in game week 19 have to play Arsenal away. In that fixture, Nottingham Forest or Neco Williams is playing Southampton away. Southampton are not a prolific attacking side, and so we could see some clean sheets there. Whereas Everton has a home fixture to Brighton. Out of the two, I would probably be playing Neco Williams over Patterson. Everton have not been great in defence either. You really only want to be pulling in these really cheap defenders over the likes of Botman, if you are going something like this sort of setup, when they're playing teams that just do not attack fluidly. And so, I mean, we could play Patterson against Wolves at home in game week 17 if we wanted, at home to Southampton in game week 20. Those are probably the only two fixtures we'd really be looking at there. Nottingham Forest is probably only Southampton in game week 19, and then Bournemouth away in game week 21, maybe the only two where we pull them in. But Newcastle are, a pretty sound defensive unit, and them away to Crystal Palace will probably have me playing Botman ahead of the likes of Neco Williams, who is away to Bournemouth anyway. And so hopefully we don't have to pull on this bench too often. Now, the strategy around this 3.5’mium is to start with it and then work away from it after the first few game weeks once we kind of have an idea of how all the teams are performing, how they have rejoined, and whether or not they have picked up from where they left off, whether there's been any improvement from some of the teams that were struggling or any fall-offs from some of those high-performing teams. And I suppose the advantage of actually having a lot of money in a few players is once you sell one of those players, you are cash rich and can basically upgrade anyone in your squad. Now, the most likely transfer out, as I have said earlier, will be either Kane or Darwin Núñez down to a Mitrovic. This will very heavily depend on how Liverpool and Tottenham are in generating attacks in the first 2 to 3 game weeks. The double for Fulham is in game week 19, which is not an amazing double. It's at home to Chelsea and then away to Newcastle. And so whether or not I even go ahead with this play for Mitrovic will definitely depend on how Mitrovic is actually performing and how Fulham as a team are performing, whether there's any leftover niggling injuries for Mitrovic with his ankles that he was playing through at the late stages of the first half of the season, and even in the World Cup. I think they were injecting him with painkillers in order for him to play. He should have had quite a lot of rest from his last international fixture through to the start of game week 17, so hopefully he's fit and ready to hit the ground running as soon as game week 17 kicks off. But these are all, potential plans as to what could happen with this 3.5’mium setup. Now, this setup, as you can see on screen, we've got a lot of very good fixtures for very strong teams here. We've got Chelsea at home to Bournemouth, City away to Leeds, Newcastle away to Leicester. Arsenal have a tricky fixture at home to West Ham, which is not great, but we do need some Arsenal coverage. Brighton are away to Southampton, Liverpool away to Aston Villa, Spurs away to Brentford. I mean, it's all looking pretty good. If we could skip forward to game week 18, still pretty decent matchups for all of our players here. Chelsea's away to Nottingham Forest, Newcastle at home to Leeds, City at home to Everton, Arsenal away to Brighton, Brighton at home to Arsenal, Spurs at home to Villa, and Liverpool at home to Leicester. And so I will be looking to bank a transfer game week 18. I am trying to set up this wildcard to make no transfers in the first couple of game weeks in order to get 2 transfers in the bank in order to deal with the doubles that are coming up in game weeks 19, 20 and 23. So if we just skip forward to 19 with our first double, we've got Andreas on the bench with a double away to Leicester and Chelsea. Kepa has got a somewhat tricky double at home to Man City and away to Fulham. And the rest of the squad is actually playing some tricky games. So game week 19 is going to be a bit of a make or break game week for the 3.5’mium setup, where my triple Newcastle are away to Arsenal, my triple Man City are away to Chelsea, Arsenal with Martinelli is obviously at home to Newcastle, but the others with Kane is playing Crystal Palace away, Darwin away to Brentford, and McAllister away to Everton. My bench is looking pretty strong for this game week. Andreas, obviously, I will be playing. I'm not entirely sure who I will be dropping here to bring Andreas in for his double. Nico Williams is away to Southampton, and Patterson at home to Brighton. And so for the first 3 game weeks, there's about 2.5 game weeks of pretty solid fixtures lined up for this team. At this point, I will be able to make a couple of transfers in order to deal with any of the trickier fixtures, but my bench is also strong enough to potentially play in place of. I would probably be pulling out Botman here, playing Nico Williams, and then maybe dropping Almiron for Andreas, or potentially Martinelli for Andreas. One of these two will probably make way, maybe even McAllister. In fact, it's probably going to move McAllister, isn't it? Depending on if Almiron is flying at this point and scored 2 goals in the first 2 game weeks back, he will definitely be playing against Arsenal. For me, this is just having a look at how the team may line up moving forward. That's it for the 3.5’mium wildcard draft. As I did say, I will be dropping another wildcard video in the coming days before Game Week 17 kicks off. It will be looking at a more standard wildcard approach with probably only 2 premiums in the team and balancing out the midfield and bench with some stronger options and potentially some better fixtures moving forward. So if you did make it this far through the video, please do consider giving it a like, and if you are new around here, please click the big red subscribe button and the bell icon to be notified about more FPL content coming your way. And until next time, I'll catch you again soon. Merry Christmas. The 2 goals that he got in Game Week 16 were amazing in terms of well,